Tensions were already running high over the Albuquerque Police Department when officers shot and killed a man last weekend who was barricaded in his home with several guns. This sparked a rowdy protest on Monday night that shut down the Albuquerque City Council meeting. No one was arrested, but there was a lot of back and forth. And the day after these events between the City Council and the Mayor's office about who was supposed to be watching these things and sanction any arrests if they had occurred. Now, as we tape our show on Thursday, Council planned to reconvene on Thursday night, which would be last night, of course, to address several proposals on the Chief of Albuquerque Police's position and refinance the city's debt. The Council has also issued new rules meant to prevent more such disruptions. We'll get into that. Joining us to talk about this and other news of the week, we have one of our line regulars, Rob Nicoleski of the New Mexico Watchdog. Another line regular is back at the table, Daniel Foley, former House Minority Whip. And also back with us this week is line regular attorney Sophie Martin, and we very much welcome back former Lieutenant Governor Diane Denich. Now, Sophie, protesters tried to make a citizen's arrest of the chief. Just to clear up a little legal thing here, is that actually possible? Can you do a citizen's?
Yeah. I think it's challenging.
Okay.
Let's put it that way. I think it's challenging in part because we do also have laws that say if you lay hands on an officer, and the chief certainly is one,
right.
Then there are penalties associated with that. So, but what's interesting though is that the spokespeople for that group said, this was largely symbolic. We didn't think we were actually going to arrest anybody. And so I think as a symbolic statement, a citizen's arrest has some relevance. People sort of know what that is and have a sense that that's a strong statement. Does that help you? Does that help you with that issue?
A little bit of folklore, a little bit of fact.
Issue,
right, exactly right.
Me, yeah.
Rob, let's get right to the facts of the matter. Again, as we tape this, we don't have the preview of the Thursday night City Council meeting, but we have interesting Monday night meeting shenanigans, meaning people took over. Yeah. The citizens needed to be heard in their point of view. What got served in that meeting? Did the ball move forward in some way on this APD thing?
No, the ball didn't move forward.
Why?
The protesters were able to get what they wanted, which was a lot of attention. I don't know if anything really constructive happened there. But at the same time, I'm not up in arms with what they did. There's been, a lot of controversy back and forth. They're taxpayers. They're allowed to have their opinions. It was political theater at its highest, but I don't know if it got anything done. And I think that at this point, what's important is let's try to find something constructive so the city can move forward, and I don't think that happened on Monday.
Diane, good to see you. Thanks for coming in, as always. I hear Rob's point and others that would say the same thing. Are we at that point for a rational sit-down discussion, or are we still at that point where folks need a pound of flesh here? Because a lot of folks have been aggrieved for a long time, and this is how people without power express themselves. And the reaction to that has been very interesting to me. I'm curious your reaction.
I certainly think that what happened at the City Council, the takeover, so to speak, was an expression of the bubbling frustration. When you look at the people who were in the room, these aren't crazy people. These are older people, seniors, lots of people like that. What I found interesting, two things, that it's really a collapse of city government. The council was standing around with no idea what to do. The mayor's absent, the CAO is absent. Those kinds of things, nobody was stepping in to kind of take charge or say, okay, we're just going to wait here until you're through with that, or we're going to, if there's any more disruption, we're going to call in the authorities. No one really stepped forward to do that. So I thought it was kind of a symbol of what's going on at the city level. And on another level, I think it's very odd that the way the city council's reacting, rather than thinking more about how do we deal with the problems that have brought us to this level, they're implementing a set of new rules about how not to have a disruptive council. To me, that says they're out of touch with what's going on. Talking about we lost the opportunity to get a certain kind of, we lost basis points. We've lost $25 million in police lawsuits, or whether it's our insurance company or not, people know that those things are happening. So I find that to be even further indication that there's kind of this collapse of leadership and ability to take control of the situation and do actual problem solving.
Right. It's a famous saying, Dan, amongst political people, you guys all know this, politicians do one of two things, absolutely nothing or overreact. And is this an overreaction? Again, we're not privy to how the meeting went last night, so to speak. Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
You say that just as you
Quite
leave the
purposely, actually. I'm curious and specific about the signs, about no signs. First Amendment issues, squelching of free speech. What do you think?
You know, I mean, you know, I think what they're doing is hoping to avoid, you know, having signs that are disruptive, taking the view from other people that are in the chambers watching, also having to deal with the language that could be on a sign or what's on a sign. I think that Diane raises a great point, though. I think, and I'm not so much that I'm going to blame the council per se, is I'm going to blame the folks to some extent that did this, because they're diminishing the value of what they're trying to accomplish. They're allowing this to be turned
in whose
into.
eyes? I'm curious.
Oh, I think in the
their
public's
own
eyes.
or in
No,
somebody
I think in the
else's?
public's eyes. I think.
All
I
right,
think
let me ask you an incendiary. Why should they care? Why
because
should they care? They
it's
have a
great
very
question.
specific set of
What is their, yeah,
agreements
but what is their
that
agenda?
they want to get into.
It seems to me like their agenda is they want to fix it. If they want to fix it, I don't think they're moving down that path. They're moving down a path that people are going to say all of their problems aren't going to be taken serious. They're doing political theater when I think they have an
Why would that
opportunity.
be the natural outcome?
I think
political theater.
because I think
Why is it a negative automatically?
Oh, because
Why
I
can't it be
think that when you're
a positive?
disruptive, I think that when you're preventing people from getting the work done, even though we don't know that they would get any work done at all, but the perception is that you were disruptive, you interfered with the process. People will then diminish the value of what you bring to the table, and to me, it's it's kind of like the Occupy Wall Street folks. They had a lot of good points, a lot of things that they're right on, but it's their delivery that makes people say, "I don't want to listen to that."
I hear you. Let me go to Sophie. You know, this is not a business meeting, and this idea of people who have been traumatized should suddenly walk into a meeting with like a business meeting type approach. I don't get the disconnect here between how people react when they're traumatized versus not.
It seems to me that the message that this group, and I certainly can't speak for them, but the message that they were trying to put across, and the meaning that they're trying to bring to their actions, is this is urgent, this is important. It's important enough to put ourselves on the line. There were people who in that group who were willing to be arrested. They're raising the profile, and certainly nationally, they've once again raised the profile of the discussion, not necessarily the tone, but are saying like this is important enough that we're willing to sacrifice in order to get the discussion heard. And I think to Dan's point, I think there is a real concern that the City Council has not acted in the past and was not planning on acting at that meeting and may again not act. And so bringing that kind of heightened protest to the event, whether that's considered positive or negative, certainly depends on your outlook on the entire situation. I mean, you brought up Occupy, and I immediately as well, on top of that, thought of the Tea Party. So those are groups to the right and left that use political theater to get their points across. The points still get across, and if you are generally in support of the Tea Party's message, then you don't necessarily think that's disruptive. If you're generally in support of this group's message, and I apologize for comparing the two, but in the theater.
That's a reasonable comparison. If you're going to walk around with like a 9mm strapped to your dog in protest,
Did
and
that
you have the
happen?
right to do that, that happened in our state with our
But
Tea
Gene,
Party
I
folks.
think, but Gene, I think
and nobody had a cow about that. And then suddenly
but Gene, I
folks who
think
have
we're
been,
missing.
you know,
But
what are we missing? What am I missing?
My point, Gene, is that if the goal is to go to the meeting and disrupt the meeting to get national attention to a problem and hope somebody else comes up with an idea to fix it, then they were successful.
I hear you on the first part. I'm not sure if we can ascribe the second part, the hopeful part.
Well,
let me finish with Diane
but I
Dennis
think
here
at the end
and
of the
we'll
day,
get
if
moving.
you actually want to, if you want to drive change, and you're wanting policy to be changed, when you allow people to move you to the side and say you're a joke, it's a circus, then I think you're losing the ability to make that change. I would hope that these people that showed up really are trying to make policy changes that are better for Albuquerque.
You know, I think what Dan's missing, though, is there have been such a series of meetings. There is no
That's right.
lack of good ideas and ways to solve this problem. There is a lack of action and any ability to take any action by anybody
I agree with
in
you,
the city.
Diane. I
And
agree
so,
100% on
yeah.
that. I'm not blaming that.
So at
I
that
think that we've
point,
known
I
this
think
problem's
those
existed forever.
frustrations,
Sure.
I think they felt like maybe they didn't have anything else to do but to draw attention to
I would agree with
themselves.
that. There's been plenty
and
of sit-down
to-
meetings over
I
the
was
past
also
4 years
surprised
that
that
have
the
been.
council was actually surprised that the frustration
That was
at
probably the
that
biggest
level.
shock to me.
Yeah, like you didn't
Everybody else
really-
knew it was going to happen,
Yeah.
but them.
So, go ahead,
I
Rob.
would say that for that group, earlier on Monday, they disrupted that meeting, big deal in some ways. But I think you're allowed that once.
Why?
If that happens
Whoa,
again,
stop there. Why is it just once? Who made up this rule?
Well, I would say that when you're talking about the court of public opinion.
Why is that? Why is that a truism?
Because you're
let me-
preventing progress, that's why.
Right, because I think if you're going to have what amounts to a protest, but without any solution, that you can do that. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of anger out there. But if you do that continuously, then
I hear your point, but this clock that other people are determining for others' behavior is bizarre to me. It
Well,
just
Gene,
really
And
is.
I don't
It's
think
Gene,
that
you've got
group
this-
has no
you've got-
solution.
Right, there's
It's
plenty of
just that
solutions they're
that
talking
was
about.
not the moment at which the solution was being discussed.
That's right.
The push for action was what was happening there.
Let's finish up there. Coming up, we hear from one more gubernatorial candidate, and that would be Howie Morales.